Hi friends, my name is Borrodante. Let's talk about layers and strokes. So this little tutorial, or not even really a tutorial, just a tip, is actually an answer to a question someone asked me. So Jed Stewart asked, I don't understand how does merging help other than to speed up Photoshop, because the merging shouldn't do anything other than deny access to all the little things you did, right? So here's the thing, the difference between artwork made fully in layers and the one that was made only in one layer or like finalized in one layer is actually pretty huge. Let me show you a couple of examples. Like here's an artwork by Alexander Nikonov. I don't really memorize the names, but I memorized the artwork. So this is a cool concept artist, and look at his technique. It looks really awesome. Like you can see the beauty in the shape of each part of the character. Shapes are very confident and they follow the common logic altogether. Like you can see how all the colors, they actually spread on the surface. Here's another artwork by Sergei Kolesov. So try imagining painting something like this in layers, using layers for different lights maybe and different colors. I only use it to create some extra colorful additions. Even this artist, for instance, you can see this tiny logo on the shoulder and the logo on his weapon. That was like an overlay mode or something like that, just because that's like painted on the surface. It doesn't change the geometry of the surface, so you don't really have to think through anything and you can really make a sharp overlay for that. But in general, the shape is so tasty looking in here, specifically because all the colors were painted in one layer. Let me show you exactly what I mean. I actually had this transformation from layers to painting everything manually, sort of, like almost in one layer. It happened on the channel. Like for the first 4 months maybe, I was painting in segregated layers, like super segregated. Each light source, the alpha of the object, everything had its own layer and it was all blended together, the whole 32-bit mode and everything. So let's paint something, I'm not even sure what, but I'm gonna be using my potato brush. So say there's some kind of object, like some kind of weird head maybe, so I'll use one silhouette I guess. And the first one I'll be painting in layers, and then the second one I'll repeat in one layer to see the difference. So right now I'll add an overlay layer for the main light, which is kind of warm, for instance. This is what you might want to use layers for, is to create a proper color distortion from different light sources, because sometimes it's kind of hard to understand how exactly colors change when warm light source and cold light source blend together on the object that is changing the color of its surface on its own as well. So sometimes it's a good idea to do that. Actually, every time I paint something using layers, someone is asking me that same question. Is this Photoshop or is this 3D? Because using layers you can actually create such a realistic lighting on the object. Not the way the traditional art is supposed to go. Nothing like that you have to think about when you're actually simulating realistic lighting with layers. So I guess it's gonna be some kind of gas mask. Now I'll add some soft shadows for the ambient light, which is this cold base color. So you can see how we're getting a very realistic rendering of light here. So it's really cool. And what's interesting, even when we're getting a very strong direct light from this sunlight, like this light, we can still remove some of the daylight, like the skylight, the cold one, and we'll get this new color, where the object is slightly darker because there's less amount of the skylight, but it's a lot warmer because there's only warm sunlight on it. And that kind of change is really hard to maintain when you're working in one layer. They don't usually do that. So you can really go realistically in that sense and create a super perfect lighting. Like, you kind of work close to what a 3D renderer does. You think through every separated light source, and then you get the final result when all the passes are combined together. So I'll increase some shadows in the dark area here. So I don't know, let's keep it this way. Then I'll go to the alpha layer and change the silhouette a bit to make it nicer. And you can see right now I can only concentrate on the silhouette of the object, and I remove or add masses on the shape, and I don't have to care about the light because it's painted in a separate layer. It's still there when I erase it. So anyway, this is the basic shape, some kind of voodoo gas mask thing, I don't know, doesn't matter. Now let's add highlights, and that would be it for this version. Highlight is just the color of the light source, which is basically like sun. So it's kind of yellow, but in the very center it will be as bright as white. So something like that. Now let's do the second head in one layer. It's harder because you have to think through everything all together. All the colors have to calculate in your head. So at first I will kind of mark in the eye holes. It's gonna be such a different head probably. So a lot better to work without layers is because you can change the silhouette, you can change any light altogether while mainly thinking only about the shape. It's harder, but it's a lot more fluid for concepting. So now I just think about how the color will distort from the sunlight. So it will come closer to yellow, it will become a bit less saturated. Like, actually think about the distortion. If the color is here, but the color of the light is there, we kind of bring this color to here with a straight line. And in the middle of the circle, ignore the square in the middle, like this circle in the middle, it's a gray color. Like this kind of stuff, I mean. Here we can actually see if the color of object is blue and the light source is yellow, that means it will kind of drag the color of the object a bit closer to that yellow, and it will become basically a bit closer to green and a lot more desaturated. If we don't desaturate it, that will mean that this object is lit by the green light source. Because in that case we would be bringing this point to this point, and there will be a lot less desaturation here. But to the opposite color, we'll almost hit complete gray at certain point. So that's the kind of thing you have to keep in mind when you're blending colors in your head without layers. So let's do that. Let's bring a little bit closer to green and desaturate. But one more thing, since it's a light source, it's adding the brightness. That's the first purpose of the light. So we bring it higher, and how high, that depends on how bright we want the sun to be. So let's say this kind of color. Check this out, it's kind of really close to what we had in the blending. So right now I'm painting the sun, and now I don't have this ability to think through where I would remove a little bit of skylight and keep the sunlight, because in that case I would have to add another calculation on top of what we just did. So right now it's really hard for me because I really have to avoid accidentally overpainting the areas where I already defined some shadows from the skylight. And it seems like everything's only getting hard and no benefits from the not using layers. But you just wait. So you see right now I got a really complex shape at the bottom of the eyebrows here. It kind of looks really cool, and it really involves both lights. I was working with the sunlight, and then without even thinking about it, I picked up the color of the shadow of the skylight, and I developed a better shape in between. I didn't do that in the previous version because I couldn't think about that. I knew that I was only going to work with the sunlight in this case, and everything I defined with the skylight is kind of locked up in the separate layer. I have to switch to it, make tiny changes, go back to the sunlight. It sounds like an obvious thing, but really it's a huge obstacle for you to design. And even more than that, the biggest problem is about the confidence of the strokes. Right now, I wanna say do a very strong shadow here. Like there will be a very sharp cutout edges. And they will be facing kind of like this a bit. So they will be catching sunlight and skylight. And then immediately there will be a hole under them. Like a very sharp cut here. That's the point of it. And what I'm doing, I'm just using a very bright sunlight color, like sunlight plus skylight color, the brightest one anyway. And I just paint this sharp edge. Then I pick up the darkest one and I develop a better, sharper design for this cut. And I go back and forth just quickly picking up colors I need to create this sharp edge. Now this looks really cool. If I would actually think about what I'm doing while making any tutorial ever in my life. Then I'll add some tiny like natural bits of this rubber it's made of, this mask, and I'll create this shape hanging off of it. So there we have it, some kind of cool, realistic, very tiny and awesome details that define the nature of the material that the object is made of. Now let's try to repeat that in the version that has a bunch of layers in it. Right now I know that I have to add this sunlight thing, but the sunlight is segregated from everything else. So now I'll summon the color picker. I'll choose to pick up color only from the current layer from this dropout menu because Photoshop is fucked up like that. And I'll pick up the color from the brightest point. So I'll get this actual bright yellow color that we have inside of the layer. So right now I'm painting with this color. So now I'll be adding the details of the cut rubber. And I'm not even gonna bother to do a good job here because you see the biggest problem here. Now I'm defining really sharp details with only one light source. The next step is go to the other light source. Let's go to the skylight and let's start removing shadows from it. And let's try hard to get perfectly into the shape of the strokes of those cuts that we made with the sunlight. And we'll fail to do so. And all the shapes, all the silhouettes, all the strokes will be very unconfident looking because you have to define the same silhouettes of these cuts twice or 3 times. And any stroke that was defined more than once is gonna look messy and gross. You will lose the dynamics of the shape, you will lose everything. It's gonna look very uncool. Going back to this artwork, check this out. Look how this shape of this plate on the ribcage of the character looks like. It's super bright. And then there's a very confident cut. We can see how it's just one stroke that's been cut with another color underneath it. And we kind of see that it was actually done in one layer because there are some strokes around it when he was polishing the shape. And it looks very confident and awesome, robust, cool shapes of the strokes. You can't achieve that if you work in different layers. That's the bottom line here. But what's awesome about layers is that we can use them in our benefit in different types of activities. Let's make it an overlay on top of everything, or actually underneath the highlights, and change the color of the object somehow. So we can actually paint like an artwork on the surface of this object. It would be super hard to add this kind of colors on the surface of one layer version without messing everything up. Because in this case, when we're adding colors here, that's exactly when we should keep the silhouettes that we already defined and not touch them. Because right now we're not working with lights anymore. We're just painting the surface. What I'm trying to say is, let's just copy this thing to our confident strokes version, and we have the same result, right? Awesome. But after that we should merge it, and if we say want to make some kind of bits of crumbling paint on the surface, we should definitely do that in already merged version, because when bits are falling off, they're creating a shadow and at the same time revealing the color of the unpainted object. And those kind of details should also be defined in one stroke to look more awesome. So you really have to plan your strategy where you need separate strokes, like when you should segregate the colors, and where you should really keep everything in one layer to create these awesome, confident strokes. Basically, it's about painting the surface. If your object, your design, has kind of like color painting on the surface, or a tattoo, or a logo like this, you keep that in a separate layer. In here, some kind of paint went down, so this was a separate layer, but the artist didn't even bother too much to putting it in overlay mode or anything. It's just a very colorful, super bright spot here. But right here we can see like this is kind of a warm color, and then this bluish color again. This was painted on top in a separate layer. But everything else, when you're working with the light, you have to avoid segregating the layers, because this is when you are shaping up the form. I guess this is it, I'm just repeating myself now. But I know that most artists use kind of extra lighting in overlay mode or something like that. That's cool for defining the basic color palette. This is the way I learned this thing about how to stretch the cool colors closer to the warm light source color or whatever. This is exactly how you can learn that, how you can memorize the way the colors will be distorted. Like you're adding this yellow sunlight on top of the cool object, and you just color pick the result, and you learn how the change went from this to this. What's the distortion? But then you can just merge everything together and keep working in one layer. This is also a good strategy. This is what I do sometimes as well. Even if we have like a very complex lighting and we did it in separate layers, right now I can have all the confident strokes I need. So this is where the benefit comes from. You can start in separate layers for whatever you want to create a very messy, quick build-up of the colors with layers, then merge everything together and keep working with this messy base as your color palette, like a super smart color palette for this particular scene. It's really cool. So I say don't really worry about losing information when everything in a separate layer, like you're always struggling. Is it time to merge everything or not? Just define all the lights from all the sides and then just merge everything together and keep working. You already have everything you need. You have all the colors. Now just start shaping up, picking up the colors right from the canvas. Look how pleasant the silhouettes look here, because we're defining the shapes with the sunlight at the same time. It's so cool. And look at this, how this looks amazing. This is where you feel this awesome touch on the surfaces. Especially when you see that when there's like different colors, but it's still defined with one confident stroke. Every silhouette is one stroke. And not a mass of this kind of stuff. Look at this nonsense. I think it illustrates pretty well. Well done, Head. You did a good job illustrating. Long story short, using separate layers is good when you are defining colors that don't touch the shape. If you need to define shape, don't segregate any lights or any kind of details in separate layers. I hope that's clear enough. You can download all these hats with all the layers on the Patreon's page for free. And I thank you for watching if you did. I guess you did if you're here. Leave a like and subscribe. Tell a friend. Keep it simple. Do whatever you want. And I will see you in the next one. Bye! This looks like a mask for a superhero. By the day he was a simple YouTuber. And by the night he was a very sleepy YouTuber.